All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight. I apologize for some of the technical hiccups that Zoom/time zones brings to me. But thank you so much for joining tonight. My name is Christian Ramirez, and I'm the Public Programs Manager here at Phoenix Art Museum. And we're happy to have you here this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce one of our 2019 Phoenix Art Museum Artist Grant Recipient, Kimberly Lyle, an anti-disciplinary technologist, scientist, artist at the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, Pataranutaporn. Tonight, they'll be in conversation around their collaborations and artistic practices. So before we begin, just a little bit about the format tonight. Kimberly and Pat will mostly be in dialogue, but if anyone in the audience has questions, please feel free to send those through the chat or Q&A feature. I know that they'd be thrilled to have any input on your end on things that you might want to know more about. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our museum members for their continued support and to give a special thank you to William Randolph Hearst Endowed Fund for Educational Programs for their generous support in educational events and programs at Phoenix Art Museum. I'd also like to note that the 2019 Phoenix Art Museum Artist Grant Recipients exhibition is currently on view until September 5th. We hope that you're able to make it out to the museum to see the show. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers. Kimberly Lyle is a transdisciplinary artist utilizing sound, sculpture, interactive electronics, and new media. Grounded in research, her work explores our relationship to systems of communication, learning, and technology. Many of her projects aim to dissolve boundaries between languages, human and machines, past and present, and each other. She has exhibited around the world and most recently as part of the International Symposium on Electronic Arts in the Republic of Korea. She holds a BA in psychology and received an MFA in Intermedia from Arizona State University and is currently an assistant teaching professor of digital art and design at Pennsylvania State University. And Pat Pataranutaporn is an anti-disciplinary technologist, scientist, and artist at the Massachusetts Institute for Technology. He is part of the Fluid Interface Research Group at MIT Media Lab, which specializes in designing on-body technology for human enhancement. Pat's research is at the intersection of generative artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, and wearable computing, specifically at the interface between biological and digital systems. His artistic projects have been exhibited internationally, most recently at the National Museum of Singapore and in the London Design Festival. So thank you both for being here. Thanks for the folks that are in the audience, and take it away, Kim.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you for having us and for giving us the space for Pat and I to get to talk and spend some time with all of you. I can't see anyone, so I'm gonna just go ahead and start. The way that we sort of thought we would format this is I'm gonna talk for about 10 or 15 minutes, just a little bit about my art practice, and Pat's gonna kind of start our dialogue off after that with some questions, and we'll go from there and see where that leads. And hopefully all of you will contribute questions as well. Okay, so I wanted to just start before showing some works with a framework for how I've thought about art making over the past few years. And this first chart is something by Dick Higgins, who was a Fluxus artist. And he really was trying to invent a new type of art that merged all of the arts together called Intermedia. And you see all of these intersecting circles with poetry, performance, science, conceptual art, etc. And this idea of kind of starting to get rid of boundaries and intersections. And I love this idea, and I want to push it further and begin to, in my own practice, dissolve some more of these sort of solid outlines and start to observe these more interconnections that go beyond just, beyond only inside of the art world. And something Pat had shared with me a few years ago was this, another sort of, it's called the Krebs Cycle of Creativity by Mary Oxman, who's part of the MIT Media Lab. And it's a proposal for thinking about art in connection to science, engineering, and design. And so in this diagram, scientists sort of are producers of information and knowledge, and engineers take that knowledge and start to create utility out of it, things that we can use. And designers then take that utility and start to produce objects and architecture that affect our behavior and how we navigate the world and each other. And then artists, as our kind of role is sort of perceiving these changes in behavior and creating new cultures and questionings of that, those behaviors. And scientists, then it starts over as scientists sort of also observe what artists are producing. And it's sort of this really nice, fluid, circular diagram of a way to think about art making that I was really drawn towards. And so I just have a few questions that Pat and I have previously sort of talked about and I've thought about for each of the works that I'll just show you fairly quickly. And then hopefully that'll be enough to sort of launch us into a conversation. The first one is between languages. And so I've thought a lot about the similarities and differences that exist between different languages and really wondering what we can learn from interpreting the world through another language. And I'll play specifically this first piece is about the relationship between Spanish and English and sort of recognizing those similarities and differences. And I'm going to play it. It's purely sound, so your screen should be black and it'll just be sound.
Arena, arena,
balloon,
balón,
billion,
billón,
bizarre,
bizarro,
carpet,
carpeta,
casualidad,
casualty,
constipado,
constipated,
contest,
contestar, embarazada,
embarrassed,
emocionado,
emotional,
enviar,
envy, exit,
éxito,
fabric,
fábrica, familiar, familiar,
Final.
final,
And so what you just heard were two voices back and forth speaking what are called false friends or amigos falsos in English and Spanish. And these are words that look alike, they sound alike, but they actually have very different meanings. And it sort of, this idea came about from growing up with a mother who was a Spanish teacher for over a decade, and a lot of the conversations that happened there, and then also my own process of learning Spanish when I was younger, and thinking about these things that might float across languages but be misunderstood and mistranslated. So for example, the word embarazada in Spanish means pregnant, but you might misinterpret it to be embarrassed if you didn't know fully each language. And so I'm kind of interested in those spaces between where things float between each other, but also maintain that difference. Something else that I've been exploring too are the differences and similarities between computer programming languages and human languages. So I grew up with a dad who was a computer teacher for over a decade as well. And so this sort of seeped into my thinking about language. And computer languages have a very strong logic to them. One misspelling or wrong space in the wrong part will make the whole program fail. And so there's no really room for failure or misunderstanding like there are in human languages. And so I was interested in that combination or that difference between the two. And so this is one other sound piece that I'll play and then explain in a minute.
Do throw.
do return,
Throw.
where, do try,
Return catch. Throw. Try return.
differ,
And so what you just heard was a snippet of a piece that I did where me and another person would try and speak words from this coding language, from several different coding languages, and try and humanize them or try and give them tone and meaning. And you can see that it fails because it sounds like gibberish, but it was more of just a questioning of if coding languages are perfect, is that okay? Is that, what does that mean? And this is how it's presented, glass. And so it's invisible until you see the shadow on the wall. Another fluidity is between artist and audience that I'm interested in. So what happens if the artist releases control of the work and if the audience can interact with it to change its outcome? And so again, this blurring between artist and audience. And this was a piece I did, one of the first pieces that started to question this. And what would happen is you were invited into this room and you could use these letters to spell a word, and you would hit that red button and it would take a picture of your word there's a little webcam on where the light source is coming from, and that word would get entered into the text that's projected on the wall. And you can see there's a close-up of the felt that you would put your word on. And then it allowed for each person that would come, it would save your word, and every time another person would enter a word, it would scramble all the words that had been put in previously. So each time someone entered a word, it would change meaning. And the text could be changed as well, but I left it sort of as a simple artist statement, and people could put words that sort of related to what they were thinking about at the time. Another area of fluidity that I've been curious about is between humans and technology. So what happens if we think of technological tools as extensions of our bodies, as well as our desires? And technology isn't just computers and phones, but also things like hammers and pencils that are extensions of our body that help us, you know, fix something on the wall or make a drawing and sort of fulfill the desires in a way. These are also technology. And so thinking about blurring body and technology as well is something that I've been exploring. And this is a piece called Chalk Tongues that came out of a desire of wanting to speak. And so it's sort of a poetic tool or a poetic technology that takes the part of the body, the tongue that we use for speaking, and turns it into something that you can write with. And also the word in Spanish for tongue is lengua, which also relates to language as well. And these were available for people to take and draw with and create their own meaning out of it as well. Another thing that I'm thinking about constantly in my work is just inclusion of more senses. So can artwork embrace more of our senses beyond the eye that we normally think of in visual art? And can technology help with extending our senses in this way? Two senses that I'm particularly interested in are touch and sound. This quote by Diane Ackerman, our sense of touch is uniquely designed to process information quickly, often without the neural round trip to the brain. Our skin processes subconsciously. So thinking about the body is also being just as important as the brain. And then this quote by the Interspecifics, an artist collective in Mexico about sound. Could sound become a transduction bridge beyond languages, allowing us to experience the otherness through our own bodies? Sound is a very intimate medium. You can close your eyes, but you can't really close your ears. Even if you do, usually you can hear through. So it enters the body in a really intimate way. And so I like thinking about the meaning behind both of those senses. And also thinking about maybe in the future smell or taste or other senses that we don't consider as human. Maybe there are other senses that can later be in the future sometime be incorporated into works of art as well. This is one piece that sort of deals with those things. I'll just play it and then talk about it.
E, A, O, A, O, U, E, A, 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 U, E, A,
So in this piece, it's called Floating Vowels, and it has, for each tongue that you see on the sculpture, it is wired to a capacitive touch sensor. So the same thing that makes your phone work when you touch it, there's wire that connects to all of these tongues in the back of the sculpture that triggers a sound when you touch them. And all of the tongues are shaped so that they're shaped in the way that they are when you pronounce vowels in Spanish or vowels in English. And so you start to hear similarities and differences subtly with that. And the interest in vowels is just because it's starting to dissolve language into pure sound almost. It kind of hints at language, but it's not really creating any meaning. it almost becomes like a musical instrument in a way. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just works that kind of address between the past and present and kind of dissolving that boundary, and asking the question, what happens if we look at technologies through a lens with a longer history, not just, you know, Siri and Alexa and things that exist now, but looking, you know, hundreds of years ago to technologies that were being invented and created that weren't necessarily digital. And wondering if those of the past can kind of help us understand those of the present and maybe even in the future. Through a lot of my works with language, and a lot of the stuff that I was reading, I came across this old machine from the 1700s that was the first attempt to produce voice, and it was by Wolfgang von Kempelen. And how it would work is you would push on that sort of bagpipe looking structure, and air would be pushed through this box and start to create human sounds. It's very eerie when you see it in action. And I thought I would create my own, or translate it into the present and create my own version. So I'll play a video of this piece in action.
He ulla to roten pull ro e tata ging pulla button you but t da to da you akka o the up and row in and l and wheel four to left to
And so how this works is I've replaced part of the machine with human breath. And so you would walk up to any of the stands and you can see there's a little sensor there, and you would breathe onto it or blow onto it, and it would trigger sounds. And you can see there's a little microcontroller which holds all of the sound. And every time someone blows on the other end of the tube, it would scramble sounds from many different languages. And so it begins to sound like gibberish in a way. And all of them together were kind of representing these multiple perspectives. And what surprised me most is that people would come in the center, and depending on where they were coming from, would interpret things differently. And so I had someone from Italy who came in the center and was listening and heard Italian words being spoken. And so it was really interesting to me to think that how someone had learned language really affected how they were hearing the sounds that were coming out of being scrambled out of machines. And so the last one is just working together. And so thinking about, you know, what do we have to learn from others? Could artists benefit from removing the I and looking outside the individual and collaborating more? And I kind of put this in here because Pat's here. And specifically art and science, because we've had a lot of conversations about how they can benefit from each other more and more. And so I'm excited to talk more about that. And this last piece is just something that Pat and I collaborated on, where we proposed a new form of human-computer interaction. And we're thinking about how it might change, you know, what it might look like in the future. And we came up with something called human magic interaction. And this idea of magic as being something that we don't fully understand, but just puts us at awe, but it also has sort of a trickery to it. And so we're not, you know, I think it's fun to get to think about these things from all different angles. And the human magic interaction sort of is when humans can interact with technology completely fluidly. You don't really need a tangible interface like a keyboard or a mouse, but it's more fluid. And I'll give you an example. So we propose these sort of speculative designs based on our idea of the human magic interaction model. This is the genie machine, and so it's based off of the character Aladdin and the idea that you could rub a lamp and make a wish and express a desire, and it would come true immediately. So the genie machine is a wearable device, and it's sort of speculating of the future of sort of assistive intelligent agents that will be embedded in the things that we wear, maybe even our skin, we don't know, and imagining how its language processing unit you can speak your desire and it will be immediately connected to, for example, a plant in your home, and you can have it water the plant or change its immediate environment so that it's in a more pleasant state, for example, or you might be able to fabricate something instantly based on voicing your desire. So we're proposing speculative designs, but also questioning, what does this mean for how it's going to change our society's behavior as well? So thinking at it from a lot of different angles. And before, the last thing I just wanted to put in here was a quote by Isaac Asimov, who's a wonderful science fiction writer. There is an art to science and a science and art. The two are not enemies, but different aspects of the whole. And I really love that as a way to kind of bounce off into a conversation with Pat. So with that, I think I can stop sharing and maybe we can have questions. Maybe Pat has questions as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kim. This is a very awesome presentation, and congratulations on the grant and also your author wonderful works. I really really inspired by your presentation, and it reminds me of the conversation that we have on many topics, including art, design, science, and engineering. And the quote that you end with also remind me of another quote by Da Vinci, where he said that we should look to art in science and science in the art, and learn to see that everything is connected, and that will lead us to the kind of complete understanding of the human mind. And I didn't know that Asimov also have a quote related to that, so that is wonderful. The first thing that I want to kind of ask you and discuss with you is actually when Christian introduced both of us, she used the term transdisciplinary artist and used the term anti-disciplinary technologist. And I just think that there's something really interesting when thinking about interdisciplinary and anti-disciplinary. Like in the media lab, we kind of celebrate our lab as being anti-disciplinary. We look at things beyond and try to break the boundary. But in a way, when you talk about interdisciplinary, there's also something really interesting about connecting the dot. I wonder, what do you think about these two terms, anti and inter? And how do you think is how do you think it's connected to the way that science and art should kind of come together?
Yeah, this is a great question. Yeah, I actually, when she introduced you as being anti-disciplinary, I thought that was an issue. I'd never heard that term before. I hear interdisciplinary a lot in the art world.
Yeah.
And I think some people use it without really understanding fully what it means. And so I like that you push back against that, and it being anti-disciplinary is just breaking all of those boundaries and removing those sort of, in that first image I had, these like really hard outlines between different disciplines. And I think having that be more fluid, and I don't know if there's one that's better or worse, but I think just a general understanding of accepting different and embracing different trains of thought, because no one can be an expert in anything. So like, I really always value your opinion or over mine as far as dealing with anything with science or biology, because I haven't studied that and you have. And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'd be curious to hear you also expand on that thinking around anti-disciplinary, because I'm not sure I totally understand what it means either.
Yeah, I think when you say that, it's like breaking the boundary, it's remind me of, when you mix different things together, you can think of it as like scrambled egg or salad. I think salad, you still have, different component, right? But when you kind of mix them together, you have like maybe scrambled egg or smoothie. I think that's probably my mental model of what anti-disciplinary is about. Sometimes it's too smooshy, but it has a new flavor to it. Yeah, but I think even in the media lab community, sometimes people also push back on the term anti-disciplinary as well, because many people also believe that you need to have a solid boundary to connect with one another. Then you build something extra. If you break all the boundary, then there is no discipline. Then there is no theory or foundation to build up on. So yeah, I think it's still an ongoing debate on how we should connect different knowledge together. Um, but I really like that you pay attention to language, especially when you talk about human language, computer language, or different type of language. Um, do you think there's something interesting also about like the language of human and non-human, like animal or other form of organism? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think I'm getting to that point, and I haven't reached that point yet in my
Mm.
practice. I feel like I've been making works around language for about 4 or 5 years, so it feels very new. But I think more and more I'm becoming more observant of the world around me, and even like I have a pet cat,
Yeah.
and watching my cat, I can see that there's this whole other world of senses and communication happening. Like I'll
Mm.
walk in a room with a bowl of yogurt, and she knows immediately, and she can
Mm.
smell it across the room in a way that I wouldn't be able to know that. Um, and so I think like even pheromones or things that
Right.
are completely invisible to us as humans are through science right now becoming more and more, we're becoming more aware of them. Even plant life, I think there's a lot of research now out on how plants communicate through their roots and through the
Yeah.
wind and pheromones. And so yeah, there's probably this whole invisible world that I'm not aware of, but it's interesting to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially, with microbiome as well, like the way that the body interact with bacteria in our gut, I think it's also interesting. We have a dialogue with the bacteria in our gut all the time. That's, why we are still alive, right? So I think it's kind of interesting when you mention like, chemical language or non-human or even molecular language. I think it's all interesting. But that also made me curious, after you work on sort of like this project related to language across scale and across discipline, what is your definition of language now, or you don't? Yeah, I'm curious.
That's a tough question. That's a good question. Hmm. I think I think that I think that's why I make work about it, actually, because I don't really know.
Mm.
Um, and I think that I'm trying to kind of figure it out through the work that I make. Is it, I think that a lot of people think of it just as communication, but I also think that, why do humans have this specific, why have we evolved to have this specific skill to speak, and not only speak, but in a bunch of different forms, different languages that have emerged across the world. And so I think,
Right.
I think it's interesting from an evolutionary perspective too, is just, how has this happened to our species? And it's been really something that I feel like has separated us from the animal world or plant world, and maybe shouldn't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question. I think I'm still figuring that out.
Yeah, I think that's and I mean, I think another thing that is really interesting about your work also is that you are playing with the physicality of language, which in a way is, almost um it gives a new weight, or create new gravity around it. I think this is really interesting because I never thought of my tongue, like when I speak, I am from Thailand, right? So I speak Thai and speak English, and I never thought of, whether my tongue will look the same when I speak Thai or English. And when I see your work, it kind of made me reflect on, how my body responds, or how my body sort of organizes itself in order for me to produce a sound. Yeah, the physicality of the language is also really interesting. How do you came into thinking about that?
That's so interesting to hear. That makes me happy that it makes you think about
Yeah.
like more of an awareness of that. I think that I think it comes from my mom was a language teacher and would use a lot of physical objects to teach children Spanish. And so there was a lot of tangible using of objects or arts and crafts to understand different words. And I also worked for a while, a long time ago, at Montessori schools, and they do a lot with using solid objects to understand a verb or adjective. An adjective is a round ball, or a verb is a triangle or a pyramid. And they play with these things to just, like, physically, bodily understand parts of speech. And so, yeah, there's this really interesting thing that the body can learn language as well as the brain, not only the brain. And I think also the medium, artists tend to talk about themselves in mediums. I do this, but I think also maybe it's more important to talk about materials. So like with the tongues, I use chalk, and chalk is sort of associated with learning or pedagogy. And in old times, you know, people would use chalk on a chalkboard to learn something as a way of adding meaning. So I think material can be really important on that way too. Yeah.
You know, that's also remind me of I don't know if you know the movie Argo, featuring Ben Affleck. It's about it's based on a real story during, I think, the World War. No, sorry. After that, it was about the U.S. intelligence agency that tried to kind of help the person that worked in the embassy in Tehran. And it was really interesting because when the spy tried to disguise themselves, they'll put like prosthesis in the cheek to make them sound differently. And there's also something interesting about, you know, kind of like augmenting yourself or disguising yourself by putting things in your mouth in order to speak differently or sound differently. And that's also remind me of your kind of tongue project. Yeah. And I think this physicality that you have in your project is also remind me of another term, tangible, which I think you also you know, exhibit your work at the TEI, right, the Tangible and Embodied Interface conference. And I wonder if you think about language as being more tangible or less tangible after, you know, all the work that you have done that have explored language across the boundary and show the fluidity of language across culture and medium.
Sure. Yeah. I think this is a great question. I think my last work, I started where you blow into the tube, and I started thinking about breath as being language. And like before we speak, there's like breath as being sort of a foundational part of language for every language. And so that's intangible. I mean, it's something that's intangible. So I actually, I don't know if it is tangible or not. I think that it could be argued to not be tangible for that reason alone.
But in your shop project, you know, that become very tangible. Like I can pick it up and write with it too.
Yeah. So I think I'm in this boundary of like making things that are invisible and trying to visualize them, or taking, I think there's poetry there, and taking things that are normally invisible, like code, and making them audible or visible, tangible, heard, or felt. Yeah.
Right, because in a way there's a fluidity and also tangibility, which, you know, I never think would go together very well, but I think your work sort of like mix these two qualities together in a very interesting way. And that also made me wonder about silence, because I think part of language, you know, like it's not just about the word that we verbalize, but also the gap between the words, right? And I wonder, how do you think about silence in relation to your work as well?
That's a really lovely question. Silence. Yeah. I think that silence is also language, you know, the gaps in our speech, or when our Zoom call gets interrupted and there's silence, or when, yeah, I think I'd like to think more about that, actually. I think that's something that I want to take after this talk and think more about, because I don't know entirely.
You know, the John Cage, yes, I was going to say that, yeah.
John Cage is wonderful. So for those that don't know, John Cage works a lot with silence, and kind of argues that there isn't really he did a famous piece, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, where he has someone sit down at a piano, supposedly going to play a piece, opens the piano and just sits there for the audience. And the audience has to listen to everything around them. And you realize there is no silence. There's people shuffling their feet, sneezing, or, you know, and I think that's kind of beautiful too. Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, both the the space and the object, both the sound and the silence, I think, come together and form language. And also, some of your work go beyond just the foundation of language, the voice and the audio, and go into the level of narrative. Like I really love the project where you invite the audience to come and scramble the little letter on the table. I wonder, and I think what's really interesting about it is that not all your work is about narrative. Some of the work, is more abstract than that. So I wonder, how do you think about the relationship between narrative and the foundation of language, something that's kind of much in a lower level, in computer term, much lower level, but, maybe also very important. Yeah.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I think it's interesting because my first works, I'm using whole words and I'm using like the narrative, and then
Yeah.
it's kind of chronological. And so I think over time, I'm sort of dissolving language into just pure sound. We're just starting to get to that point where it's just dissolving or making it sort of useless in communicating, and to get to a point where it's just pure sound, and maybe it's understood in our bodies some way and not necessarily in our brains. So yeah, I think that's an interesting observation, and I think I'm kind of connecting that now that over time I've been dissolving language and more and more and more.
And in a way, I think you also, when you sort of like, dissolve the language down into sound, I think there's also something interesting about going from like the conscious level to the unconscious level too, right? Because, when you listen to word, you think about things that come to mind. But when you have reaction to the sound, sometimes I think it involves something that is kind of much more primitive or something at the unconscious level. Like you may not know the meaning exactly. You don't have a logical explanation to that sound, but it involved like maybe the emotion or more abstract experience. So I think in a way you kind of go deeper from the conscious level to the sort of the unconscious in a way, which I think is really interesting. And it also remind me of an experiment, I think by people at University of Oxford, where they show like an incomplete sentence, and then people still be able to read it, even though you don't show the full sentence, you leave some character behind. And yeah, I think there's also something interesting about the level of conscious experience that playing when you are showing incomplete language too. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's like how a song can make you cry, or a song can make you like energized. Music especially. I'm not a musician, but I think that music might be a place to look to for that also, what you're kind of talking about.
Yeah. And now, I want to turn to one of my favorite topic, which is the computer part. And one thing that I think is also, there are many things that are exciting about your work. I keep saying this, but what I really love is that in a way, in some of the project, you're using computer code to create the experience, to create the interaction. And in some project, I think you not only use the code as sort of like working in the background to make the work happen, but you actually expose it, like in your one of the project that show how different word that are commonly used in computer language. You sort of turn it and put it in the front and expose the computer language as the art piece itself. I wonder how do you think about these two process? One where you sort of use it in the background versus kind of expose it to the audience.
Yeah, I think it also comes from wanting to make these things that are invisible visible. And I mean, code is everywhere. I mean, it's what is allowing us to be on Zoom right now, but we're not aware of it. It's in our phones, it's on social media. It changes our behaviors in so many ways. And I think there's and then there's this idea of people, commercial benefits of learning code and making money from knowing how to code. And so I think that it's really, and this is where I think artists can come in and sort of question that, like I took a programming class. That piece came out of me sitting in a programming class with 50 other engineers and sort of being mesmerized by the poetics of the language of the word. And especially in programming languages, there's like words to prevent errors. And so I was just like, what can I do with this? It's not just entering it into a computer to make, a game or something happen. And so my project for that class was to start speaking code with someone else, and it would inevitably fail. And just questioning, are we okay with having languages that don't fail or that are so logic based, and questioning logic and that way of experiencing the world. Like maybe it's okay if there's misinterpretation or humanness or failure in language.
That's really interesting. You think that, like that's something interesting about, when someone is born in, a specific country and they learn to speak the language as as a mother tongue, or as a native speaker. I wonder in the future if, baby are born with computer, and the first language that they learn is how to program, because, they want to create video games, or, video clips or cartoon or whatever. Do you think those people will sort of speak differently than people that are born with a human language?
That's such an interesting idea. I never have pictured that being a possibility. I like,
That would be an interesting project, right? To think about, children that are born with computer code and, learn to speak human language as the second language.
Yeah, like will they have trouble understanding that a lot is not just the words, is not word based, but it's in the body and is in the tone, in the pitch, all of those nuances that maybe we don't tune into, that are kind of absent in just typing out code.
Yeah. Because, in your project, right, when you verbalize this term like cache, try, or return, I never verbalized those terms before. Like, we use it in computer language, right? We type that all the time. In some code, you have that many times. But when you verbalize it, it's very emotional and interesting. Like you tell computer to try. It's very human thing. And, I don't know if computer, I mean, it had the command to try, but I think the meaning for that is very different than telling your friend to try to do something, Yeah, I wonder, what do you think about it? What was your experience when you verbalized this term that are usually used in computer language?
Yeah, so I think tone is so important. Like and relationship to the person, like how well you know the person needs to. But I mean, if I whisper to you, try, that's different than if I yell, or if I am like, try, or if I scream, try hard, like there's so many different ways that could be interpreted. It's kind of like being texted something, and there's so many ways to interpret it. Yeah, so that's interesting. I would like to kind of imagine that more, that humans having, or humans speaking a human language as a second language, and coding as a first language.
Yeah, I think many years ago, Wired magazine has this provocative statement on the cover saying, in the future, we will not program computer, we will train it like we train dog. And I can imagine, like when we say try to the future computer, we will have different tone to it. And I wonder, as computer learn to sort of speak and understand human language more and more, do you think the tonality, like when we write code, do you think we should embed the emotion into it? Like as if I'm really angry and I'm typing a code, I should embed that into the code that I'm typing? Or do you think there should be a separation? Because I think that's the way that humans communicate, right? We embed emotion, even though we try to be neutral sometimes when we, in informal setting. Do you think it's important that in the future, as humans communicate more with computer, we should try to make computer learn to recognize this tone in the language, even though those language are purely for functional application? Like if I'm writing code to, I don't know, launch a rocket to space or something, purely functional application, do you think those rockets should interpret my tone when I'm writing the command or a program to them?
That's interesting. I think, I teach a creative coding class, and I think that humanizing there's a lot of artists don't want to learn it because it's really logic based and very cold, I guess. And so I think like this might make it more accessible to people as well that maybe are scared of learning coding because it's very dry or logic based. And I even think like, what if there's a way to code using your body, like dancing, dance, code and it recognizes your body's movements, like body language. I don't know. I think that could be interesting. Our next project. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. But I think the scary part also could be that, I remember the film Her, right? When the protagonist was sort of like having this relationship with an artificial intelligence, and the voice that the AI say to the person is very empathetic, very, very caring. And at the end, it's kind of very ambiguous whether the AI actually care for the human or not, even though the language is very empathetic and caring. I wonder, you think that once computers start to speak, human language in a way that's very natural to us, like we speak to one another, do you think there would be like a downside, or will creating some sort of false empathy or things like that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think something else to consider too is it going to drive people apart from other people? Like, I think in the movie Her, he is a very shy man and sort of is
Yeah.
drawn to the AI as being his one social like connection to the world. And I think that's something that I would question or worry about, that people would over rely on. I mean, this is something that maybe people have seen during the pandemic, is people over relying on technology, and it's isolating, or it can maybe have the potential to be isolating. And so I think thinking about how it also will affect our human to human relationships could be something to consider too. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, like the human interaction. And I think this also remind me of the last piece, one of the last piece that you show, where you and your friend was kind of playing with the shock tongue. Not the it's not shock anymore, right? What is it made of? The conductive tongue. Yeah, that project where, two of you were kind of touching different tongue together, and it's sort of facilitating a very interesting experience, like where you kind of, touch. First of all, touching a tongue is an interesting activity already, but when you do it together and you hear two sound synchronously, I wonder, what do you think of that, or what is your sort of motivation for that?
Yeah, I think, I think I'm drawn to sort of interactive art because it's using technology in a way that's connecting people. So it's facilitating an interesting interaction that might normally not, I think we're so used to interacting with technology in a box form.
Right.
In a certain way. And so playing with that interaction so that it kind of jolts you out of reality or makes you more aware of something, or in that piece, I do like the playful interaction with other people. Yeah, yeah.
Touching the tongue, I think, is also really interesting as well. Like I was watching one film on Netflix, and there was a scene where, the person was punished by kind of dragging the tongue out and cutting the tongue, and there's something playful about that project. But on the other hand, you can also read it as, someone lose the tongue, and that tongue has been placed in that interactive art piece. I wonder if you sort of also thought about the sort of like the author side of that project as well, or what it can also represent.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think also it kind of is maybe speaking to, I think our relationship with technology can disembody us, and so sort of have us not really be in our bodies, but in our fingers or in our brain, or and so I think like this sort of fragmented body is something that I noticed coming up in my work, and I was, sometimes that's how I figure something out, is I make it and then I kind of think about it later, why was I making this? And I think it kind of results from maybe using technology in that way that my body doesn't feel whole, possibly, is one interpretation. But also the chalk tongues that I made was kind of a very personal piece of, I had been in a large class with a lot of people that were speaking loudly, and I'm very soft spoken, and I felt like I didn't have voice, and like was having dreams that my tongue was melting and I wanted to make it solid. And so I started casting my tongue, and then I created this sort of tool that subverted speech and allowed me to write and communicate that way. And so I don't fully, I mean, it has, I think, a lot of ways that I can think about it personally, and then also, yeah, in other ways too.
That's really cool. I mean, when I heard when you said disembodiment, I thought of it as a negative thing. But when you sort of like describe your dream, which, you know, thank you for sharing that. It's an empowerment in a way. It's like you are multiplying your tongue. Now you have a solid tongue, you know, as the sort of a tool for expression. So disembodiment can also be a form of empowerment, which is I think is very beautiful and very poetic. In a way, yeah. Christian, I'm not sure how much time do we have left. We can continue forever. I mean, this conversation is really
absolutely
awesome.
Amazing. I am like loving everything you're talking about. But yes, I do want to be mindful of time. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. It's like not really a fully formed question, but I just hearing you all talk and seeing that image at the end of your collaboration of like the person talking to the plant and then the plant delivers whatever the item is. So during this year, I've spent, like everybody else, a lot of time at home, but I spent a lot of time with my plants. And actually thinking about how you were talking about like how you communicate to a computer through coding, if you should embed feelings, like I talk to my plants a lot. And so like, that's just, I think I just get excited, like there's a new leaf. And so like, my instinct is to verbalize that to my plant. Like, I see you, I see your new leaf. Look how great you're doing. Or like, if one's a little wilty, I want to like make sure it has water. So I just chat with them. I think it's just, I don't know. I don't really have a fully formed question from it, but I guess thinking about other like forms of communication with things that can't necessarily talk back to you, but the like tonality attached to it. I feel like if I'm giving it positive encouragement in a like nice tone, that it's going to help it. But I guess just curious, like, are there any maybe inanimate objects that you communicate with as well that you feel like you need to like nurture?
Oh, now you make me feel bad because some of my plant died during the last winter. Yeah, I mean, that's very beautiful that you're talking to your plant. For me, I used to have a lizard that I talk to sometime, a lizard pet that I have. Yeah, and it passed away during the pandemic as well, so it was kind of sad. But yeah, I think we form relationship with non-human all the time, and this remind me of the work by Donna Haraway, the Cyborg Manifesto, and her work on making kin with nature. She's a cyborg feminist and a very influential philosopher, and she talked about, you know, how we as a species always have the tendency to connect with, you know, other form of beings, the technological being, the other form of biological being. So I think it's really beautiful and poetic. Yeah, Kim, what do you think?
I mean, this is hard. I really attached to my cat, and my partner jokes that I like am the cat whisperer because I pay attention to the way that the tail moves, and I can tell if she wants to play or if she's like, you know, excited. And so I think like it's non-human, but I think because we've spent so much time indoors together in the same space, I started to cue into like how she can smell things that I never could imagine, or her body movements and how they communicate something that I'm not sure if I'm misinterpreting, or yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really a big piece of it, is the amount of time that we've all had to spend indoors. Like, I think now that we're getting back to normal and like going into the office more regularly, the thing that I have been missing is actually watching my plants every day. Because I really did notice like a new item or a new leaf or a slight, like, I don't know, I just got very tuned into that as like, because I live alone, so I don't have a roommate or have anyone that I would see regularly in that way. I think that was the one part that I would just check in every day and like prune their little leaves and make sure that they were doing okay. So
That's so beautiful.
I guess I have one other question, is mostly just, how did you two meet? How did this collaboration begin? Because it really feels like I could listen to you both, like, get a podcast, please. Like, I love it. It was like, just, it could go on forever. And I'm so interested in all of the topics that you're talking about. So just curious a little bit about how you two became collaborators and friends.
Do you want to go, Pat? Do you want to?
Yeah, I think it began when I was an undergrad at Arizona State before I came to MIT for my PhD. There was this class that I think the professor need to nominate the student in. It's a special class that want to bring sort of like artists, scientists, and people from all disciplines to think about the future of art. And Kim was also in that class. I was also in that class, and the class sort of do a lot of interesting things to think about, what would the future of art look like in the technological and in the, ever-changing world. And the class is very imaginative, and we, collaborate on things together in that class and after. So, yeah.
Yeah, that and it's just continued. And we both have since sort of left those spaces, but I always kind of keep in touch of what Pat's up to because it's always really interesting and exciting. So
Well, that's amazing. Well, I look forward to the next collaboration that you guys have together. Please keep us posted. I'm honestly just like so happy that this was able to come together. Thank you both so much for your time. I know you're on the East Coast. I know it's a lot later for you than it is for me. And so I really am grateful that you made this happen. And again, like, please make a podcast or a YouTube or whatever. I'm in. I love listening to both of you speak. I'm obviously very interested in art, but science is something that felt really dense for so long. But hearing the two of you speak about it together makes it a lot more tangible and a little less intimidating. So I would imagine that I'm not the only person that feels that way, and would really love any opportunities to be able to expand that conversation because it is so relevant to everything. So thank you both. And thank you all tonight for coming. This will be posted on our YouTube page, so we'll be able to share it with everybody and anybody. And yeah, thank you again. It was such a pleasure. And I hope you guys have a good night.
Thank you.
thank you, Christian.